The metallic taste of blood filled Telara's mouth as she clawed through the rubble. Her four-fingered hands, once delicate instruments that coaxed life from alien soils, now tore frantically at twisted metal and shattered concrete. 6 hours ago, she had been carefully documenting the adaptive properties of Nerith's native fungi. Now, her research station was a smoldering crater. "Nimmy," she called, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of secondary explosions. The thin membrane flaps on her neck fluttered in distress, filtering the ash-laden air as best they could. "Nimmy, my little one." A faint cry answered her from beneath a collapsed section of the laboratory's eastern wall. Telara's heart, all three chambers of it, seemed to stop. With renewed strength, she heaved aside a fallen support beam, ignoring the searing pain as her shoulder tore. There, in the small pocket formed by a toppled incubation chamber, lay her daughter. Nimmy's normally iridescent scales had dulled to a sickly gray, and the delicate breathing vents along her sides pulsed irregularly. "I'm here, little Spark," Telara whispered, gathering the infant to her chest. "Mother found you." Nimmy's eyes, 6 glittering points arranged in a perfect hexagon, fluttered open for a moment before closing again. She was alive, but barely. Telara stumbled toward what remained of the medical bay, her normally graceful gait hampered by a deep gash in her right leg. The bombing had been swift and merciless, the orbital strikes precisely targeted at their small research outpost. No warning, no declaration, just fire raining from the sky, turning their peaceful scientific mission into ashes. "Jorith," she called weakly, though she knew it was futile. She had found her mate's body near the communications array, his chest crushed by fallen equipment. Head researcher, brilliant xenobiologist, devoted father, now just another casualty in a conflict he had never wanted part of. Night was falling over Nerith's disrupted landscape. The planet's twin moons cast an eerie blue glow over the devastation, turning the smoke into ghostly tendrils. In the distance, Telara could see the capital city burning, its gleaming spires now blackened stumps against the horizon. She found a relatively sheltered corner among the ruins and sank down, cradling Nimmy close. The infant's breathing had grown more labored, her tiny body trembling with fever. Without proper medical supplies, without the specialized antibiotics Valkyrie children needed during their first cycle of life, Nimmy wouldn't survive until morning. "I'm sorry," Telara whispered, touching her forehead to her daughters. "Your father would have known what to do, he always did." Memory fragments washed over her, Jorith laughing as he mixed nutrient solutions for their experimental crops, his patient voice explaining complex molecular structures to visiting researchers, his expression of wonder when Nimmy had emerged from her hatching pod, tiny but perfect. "All gone now." Telara began to hum an ancient Valkyrie lullaby, a melody that spoke of starlight and distant homes. It was traditionally sung to children who would not survive their hatching, a farewell and a blessing. Her voice broke on the higher notes, but she continued, offering this final comfort to her dying child. "When we reach the eternal garden," she promised Nimmy, "your father will be waiting. You'll finally meet him properly, little one." A distant rumble shook the ground, another bombardment beginning somewhere over the mountains. Telara curled more tightly around her daughter, as if her body alone could shield Nimmy from the violence of a world coming apart. She closed her eyes, preparing for the end. The lullaby faded into silence. Only the wind remained, carrying ash and the distant screams of a civilization in collapse. Then footsteps. Telara's eyes snapped open, her protective membrane sliding into place. Through its translucent filter, she saw a figure approaching through the ruins, bipedal, encased in dark armor, moving with cautious purpose. "Human. The enemy." Lieutenant Ethan Walsh froze when his helmet sensors detected the life signs. 2 Valkyrie, 1 adult, 1 infant, both with critically unstable vitals. His HUD flashed a red warning: maintain distance, avoid civilian contact, proceed to extraction point. Standard protocol after an Arcturus coalition strike. Peacekeeping forces were to document, not intervene. The diplomatic situation was too volatile for anything else. Yet he couldn't move on. Through the enhanced vision of his combat helmet, he saw her, a female Valkyrie huddled in the ruins, clutching something to her chest. Even from this distance, he could see the spreading bloodstain on her leg, the unnatural angle of her shoulder. "Command, this is Walsh," he spoke into his comm. I've got wounded civilians at these coordinates. Negative, Lieutenant, came the immediate response. Maintain mission parameters. The area is still hot. Rescue units will sweep Sector D7 in approximately 48 hours. 2 days, the Valkyrie wouldn't last 2 hours. Copy that, Walsh replied, then switched off his transponder. He approached slowly, hands visible medical kit already unclipped from his belt. The Valkyrie's eyes tracked him, all 4 of them widening in terror. She tried to scramble backward but cried out as her injured leg gave way. I'm not going to hurt you, Walsh said, knowing his translator would convert his words into the clicking, whistling language of the Valkyrie. I'm a medic. Her neck membranes flattened against her skin, a sign of distrust or fear he remembered from his xenobiology briefings. The infant in her arms made a weak, whistling sound that sent a chill through his spine. That was a death rattle in any language. Walsh stopped 3 meters away and slowly removed his helmet, revealing his face, a gesture of vulnerability among Valkyrie. The night air stung his lungs, acrid with smoke and chemicals, but he needed her to see him as a person, not a faceless soldier. My name is Ethan Walsh, he said, kneeling. I can help your child. The Valkyrie's gaze darted between his face and the insignia on his shoulder, the interlocked rings of the interstellar peacekeeping force. Not technically the enemy, but not an ally either. Humans did this, she finally whispered, her translator rendering her words into flat, emotionless English. Walsh shook his head. The Arcturus Coalition did this, I'm not with them. A half-truth. Earth was technically part of the coalition, but the IPF operated independently. Politics he couldn't explain now. Please, he said, setting down his medical kit and sliding it toward her. Your child is dying. Something changed in her posture, resignation, perhaps, or the desperate hope of a mother with nothing left to lose. She nodded once. Walsh moved forward slowly, opening his kit. The infant's condition was worse than he'd feared. Severe trauma, infection setting in, vital signs plummeting. He administered an emergency stabilizing agent designed for Valkyrie physiology, then began treating the mother's wounds. What's your name? He asked as he cleaned the gash on her leg. She hesitated, then answered, Tellara, Botanical Research Division. Her voice grew softer. My daughter is Nimi. Tellara, he repeated, applying a regenerative patch to her wound. You're safe now, I promise. She made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Safe, look around you, human, nothing is safe. Walsh followed her gaze to the devastated landscape, the distant fires, the drifting ash. She was right. They were in the middle of a war zone with enemy patrols likely inbound. Then we need to move, he decided, packing up his kit. There's a sheltered laboratory complex about half a kilometer east that's still standing. I can treat you both properly there. Why? Tellara asked suddenly, her eyes fixing on his. Why help us? Your orders clearly say otherwise. She gestured to his silenced communicator. Walsh was silent for a moment, remembering the faces of other civilians on other worlds, people he'd been ordered to leave behind. The nightmares that followed. Because some things matter more than orders, he finally said, gently lifting the now stabilized Nimi. Can you walk? Tellara struggled to her feet, testing her bandaged leg. I will manage. As they moved cautiously through the ruins, Walsh's training told him he'd just committed career suicide. His conscience told him he'd finally done something right. Behind them, the first light of dawn began to break over a landscape of destruction. Ahead, unknown dangers waited. Between them, a fragile bridge had formed, human and Valkyrie, supposed enemies, now bound by the simple, defiant act of compassion. The laboratory's subterranean level had survived the bombardment intact. Walsh secured the blast doors and activated his portable decontamination field, clearing the air of radioactive particles and biological contaminants. Once safe, he expanded his medical kit into emergency configuration, a compact but comprehensive field hospital. Put her here, he instructed, indicating the sterilized surface of what had once been a specimen analysis table. Tellara placed Nimi down with trembling hands. Under the harsh emergency lights, her daughter looked even worse, iridescent scales now dull and flacking, breathing vents barely fluttering. Walsh worked methodically, connecting his diagnostic scanner to Nimi's tiny form. The readout confirmed his fears. severe internal trauma, respiratory compromise, and early-stage nuclear poisoning from the bombardment. Survivable, but only with intensive treatment. She needs specialized antibiotics and radiation therapy, he explained, preparing an infusion of synthesized medication calibrated for Valkyrie physiology. This will help until I can get proper supplies. Telara watched him with a mixture of fear and hope. You know our biology well for an enemy. I'm trained to save lives, not take them, Walsh replied, not looking up from his work. And your species' medical data is included in our field manuals. To better kill us, no doubt. Walsh paused, meeting her four-eyed gaze directly. To better save your wounded when situations like this arise. An uneasy truce formed as they settled into a routine. While Walsh treated Nimi with hourly medication and monitored her vital signs, Telara salvaged what she could from the laboratory. Research notes, personal items, and most importantly, seed samples from her botanical projects. These are the last viable specimens of Nereth's adaptive fungi, she explained on the third day, carefully storing crystal containers in a stasis unit. Years of research, potentially lost forever. Walsh looked up from where he was replacing Nimi's intravenous line. The infant's condition had stabilized, though she remained critically ill. What does the fungi do? It can grow in irradiated soil, Telara said, her voice taking on a professor's cadence. It not only survives but cleanses the ground of contaminants. It could reclaim worlds damaged by. She trailed off, gesturing vaguely upward. By war, Walsh finished. By people like me. Telara was silent for a moment. Not exactly like you, she finally conceded. That night, as Nimi slept more peacefully than before, Walsh checked his communication system. No rescue broadcasts. No extraction coordinates. According to protocol, his team would have reported him missing, presumed dead. Another casualty in a conflict too complex for simple explanations. They're not coming for you, are they? Telara asked, startling him. She had been watching from across the room, her alien features difficult to read in the dim emergency lighting. No, Walsh admitted. I turned off my transponder. Standard procedure means I'm classified as lost in action. Why sacrifice your position, your future? Walsh looked at the sleeping infant. Some futures matter more than others. Telara moved closer, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. My people say humans cannot be trusted, that you destroyed your own world and now seek to claim ours, that you have no honor, no spirituality, only greed. And what do you say? Walsh asked quietly. Her neck membranes fluttered, a Valkyrie expression he couldn't quite interpret. I am beginning to think our stories are incomplete. On the fifth day, their shelter's security was compromised. The sensor array Walsh had established picked up coalition drones sweeping the area. Soon, ground forces would follow. We need to move, he said, already packing essential supplies. The northern ridge has a small IPF outpost. If we can reach it, there's a chance for evacuation. For you, perhaps, Telara said, carefully disconnecting Nimi from the monitoring equipment. I doubt your people will welcome 2 Valkyrie refugees. You'd be surprised what's possible when someone actually tries, Walsh replied, checking his sidearm. As they prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary, Telara suddenly placed a hand on his arm, the first time she had voluntarily touched him. My mate died protecting our research, she said softly. He believed it could help both our peoples. I thought his vision died with him. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Valkyrie expression of deep emotion. I was wrong. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile, uncertain, yet undeniably real. Then the moment broke as proximity alarms sounded. Enemy forces were closing in. With Nimi secured in an improvised carrier against Walsh's chest and essential supplies divided between them, they slipped out through an emergency exit into the wilderness beyond the destroyed outpost. Behind them, coalition troops descended on the empty laboratory, finding nothing but abandoned equipment and the lingering warmth of a shelter where, for 5 days, the impossible had occurred. Enemies had become something else entirely. The northern highlands of Nereth were treacherous even before the bombardment. Now, with unstable terrain and radioactive hotspots, they were nearly impassable. Walsh led the way, his helmet's sensors identifying the safest path through the devastation. How much farther? Telara asked, her breathing labored as they climbed a rocky incline. Though her wounds were healing, 5 days of limited nutrition and stress had taken their toll. "Another 20 kilometers," Walsh replied, adjusting the carrier where Nummy slept against his chest. The infant's condition had improved enough for travel, but she remained vulnerable. "We should reach the outpost by tomorrow evening if we maintain this pace." They paused at the ridge's summit, looking back at the valley below. Smoke still rose from the research station, now crawling with coalition forces. In the far distance, the capital city burned, occasional flashes of weapons fire illuminating the darkening sky. "I've never seen destruction like this," Tolera whispered. "Why, we posed no threat." Walsh remained silent, the question hanging between them. The official reason for the attack, that Volcari research stations were developing biological weapons, seemed hollow now that he'd seen Tolera's actual work. "Politics," he finally said. "Resources, fear." He shook his head. "The usual reasons people find to justify terrible things." They made camp that night in the shelter of a rock formation, Walsh's thermal shield creating a pocket of warmth against the mountain's chill. As Tolera fed Nummy a nutrient solution from his medical supplies, Walsh kept watch, scanning for pursuit. "She's responding well to your treatment," Tolera observed, her voice softer than usual. "You have skilled hands for a soldier." "I was a doctor first," Walsh replied, still focused on the scanner. "Joined the IPF after the Proxima Centauri conflict. Thought I could do more good in a uniform." "And have you?" The question made him turn. In the dim light of their camp, Tolera's alien features had become strangely familiar to him. The pattern of scales along her temples, the expressive movements of her neck membranes, the intensity of her four-eyed gaze. "Not until now," he admitted. Something changed in her posture, a subtle shift he was learning to read as vulnerability. "Among my people, saving a child creates a bond between healer and family, an obligation of trust." She hesitated. "It is considered sacred." Walsh set down his scanner. "We have similar beliefs, different words, same meaning. Yet our peoples have been at war for generations." "Not peoples," Walsh corrected. "Governments, corporations, those with power who need enemies to justify keeping it." He gestured between them. "This, people actually seeing each other, is what they fear most." Tolera was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate care, she moved closer until they sat side by side, Nummy cradled between them. "My mate and I disagreed about humans," she said quietly. "Jurath believed cooperation was possible. I thought him naive." Her membranes fluttered in what Walsh now recognized as sad amusement. He would be pleased to know he was right. "I'm sorry about Jurath," Walsh said. "He sounds like someone I would have respected." "Yes," she agreed. "You share his stubborn idealism." Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of how strange and unexpected their connection had become. Walsh found himself acutely aware of how her scales caught the dim light, how her alien beauty had become something he searched for each time she entered his field of vision. The moment broke when his scanner chirped a warning. "Motion detection 3 kilometers south." "Coalition patrol," he confirmed, checking the readings. "Heavy mechanized unit, they're following our trail." They broke camp quickly, continuing their journey under cover of darkness. As they navigated the treacherous landscape, Walsh made a decision. He activated his emergency transmitter, a risk that would alert both IPF and coalition forces to their position. "Why?" Tolera asked when he explained what he'd done. "We need extraction," he replied. "And I need my people to know I'm bringing you in before we arrive, no surprises." She studied him for a moment. "You're risking much." "Worth it," he said simply, and meant it. By dawn, they had reached a sheltered valley where purple vegetation glowed with bioluminescence, untouched by the devastation behind them. As they paused to rest, Nummy awoke fully for the first time since her injury, her 6 eyes bright and alert, making the chirping sounds of a healthy Volcari infant. Tolera's joy was palpable, her normally reserved demeanor breaking as she held her daughter close. "She's healing, truly healing." Walsh watched them, a complicated emotion tightening his chest. In less than a week, these two alien beings had become more important to him than his career, his oaths, perhaps even his own survival. "We'll reach the outpost by nightfall," he said. "I've received confirmation they're expecting us." "And then?" Tolera asked, the question heavy with unspoken implications. Before Walsh could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. In the distance, the distinctive whine of coalition dropships echoed through the valley. Their journey wasn't over yet. The hardest part still lay ahead. The IPF outpost was a stark utilitarian structure embedded in the mountainside, all reinforced concrete and defensive perimeters. As Walsh and Talera approached under the cover of dusk, floodlights snapped on, illuminating them in harsh white light. "Lieutenant Walsh, authentication code required," boomed a voice over external speakers. Walsh provided his credentials, adding, "I have civilians with me. Medical emergency. Request immediate entry and quarantine protocols." A tense minute passed before the massive doors began to part. Inside waited a security team with weapons drawn and a medical unit in full containment gear. "Stand down," Walsh ordered, his voice carrying the authority of his rank despite his disheveled appearance. "These are refugees under my protection." Commander Puttle, the outpost's senior officer, stepped forward. Her expression betrayed nothing as she assessed the situation, a battered lieutenant accompanied by a Volcari female and infant. "Isolation ward," she ordered the medical team. "Full workup on all three." Then to Walsh, "Debriefing immediately." The next hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, security protocols, and increasingly heated arguments. Walsh stood his ground against accusations of insubordination, compromising mission parameters, and potentially worsening an already volatile diplomatic situation. "They were conducting agricultural research," he insisted, confronting Puttle in her office after being cleared by medical. "The coalition's justification for the strike was fabricated. We need to report this." "It's not our job to determine policy, Lieutenant," Puttle replied coldly. "Our orders." "Our orders were to maintain peace," Walsh interrupted. "How is standing by while civilians are bombed maintaining peace?" Puttle's expression softened slightly. "Your service record is exemplary, Walsh. Don't throw away your career over this. The higher-ups are already talking court-martial." "Let them," Walsh said, standing. "Where are Talera and Nummi?" "The Volcari, secure in medical. Once stabilized, they'll be transferred to the Refugee Processing Center in Sector 7. Walsh knew what that meant. Years in a camp, separated from their research, their identity, treated as potential security threats rather than victims. "That's not acceptable," he said quietly. Puttle studied him. "You've grown attached." It wasn't a question, but Walsh answered anyway. "I've grown human." In the medical bay, he found Talera staring out a reinforced window at the mountains beyond. Nummi slept peacefully in a specially designed incubation unit, her vital signs strong. "They wish to separate us," Talera said without turning. "I am to be interrogated, my research confiscated, my daughter raised in what they call appropriate cultural conditions." Walsh moved to stand beside her. "I won't let that happen." She turned to him, her 4 eyes searching his face. "Why did you save us, Walsh?" "The truth." He considered the question carefully. "At first, because it was the right thing to do. Then—" He trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the complex emotions of the past week. "Then," she prompted. "Then because I couldn't imagine a world without you in it," he admitted. "Either of you." Her neck membranes fluttered in what he now recognized as deep emotion. "Among my people, such declarations have significant meaning." "Among mine too," Walsh said softly. Outside, sirens began to wail, proximity alerts. The outpost was going into lockdown. Commander Puttle's voice came over the intercom. "Lieutenant Walsh to command immediately. Hostile forces detected." Walsh hesitated, torn between duty and the promise he'd made to protect Talera and Nummi. "Go," Talera said, placing a 4-fingered hand on his arm. "Your people need you." In the command center, chaos reigned. Coalition forces had breached the outer perimeter, claiming they were pursuing biological weapons smuggled out of the research station. "They want the Volcari," Puttle said grimly, "and they're willing to attack an IPF installation to get them." Walsh looked at the tactical display, his mind racing. "Give me a direct channel to Coalition Command." "Walsh," Puttle began. "Trust me," he interrupted. "Please." When the connection was established, Walsh spoke clearly and forcefully. "This is Lieutenant Uthan Walsh, IPF Medical Division. I am transmitting data proving the Nuruth research stations were developing agricultural technology, not weapons." He nodded to the communications officer, who began sending the files Talara had saved from her laboratory. Furthermore, Walsh continued, I am formally requesting asylum for 2 Volcari civilians under Article 7 of the Interstellar Humanitarian Accords, to which both the Coalition and IPF are signatories. Silence followed his declaration. Then, remarkably, the Coalition forces halted their advance. Hours later, as diplomatic channels hummed with activity, Walsh returned to the medical bay to find Talara cradling a fully awake Nummy. Your gamble worked, she said, having been briefed on the situation. The Coalition is withdrawing its claims. For now, Walsh cautioned, this isn't over, but it's a start. And us? Talara asked, the question heavy with implication. What becomes of us now? Walsh took a deep breath. That depends. The IPF has approved your temporary asylum. You could be relocated to a research facility on Europa where your work could continue. Nummy would have proper care education. And you would return to your duties? Talara finished, her tone unreadable. Or, Walsh continued, his heart racing, I've submitted my resignation from active service. The University of New Geneva has a Zanabatunuk division that would welcome your research. They've offered me a position in their medical faculty. He paused. We could continue what we started here, together. Talara was silent for a long moment, her alien features impossible to read. Then Nummy chirped happily, reaching a tiny scaled hand toward Walsh. My people have a saying, Talara finally said. When stars collide, new paths are formed. She met his gaze directly. I would like to see where this path leads. Outside the window, dawn broke over the mountains of Nurath. In the valley below, the first evacuation ships were arriving to help survivors of the bombardment. Among them were scientists, both human and Volcari, drawn by news of the miraculous fungal samples that could potentially heal irradiated worlds. In a universe torn by conflict, a single act of compassion had created something unexpected, not just survival, but the possibility of a different future. Walsh reached out, his human hand meeting Talara's alien one, their fingers intertwining in a bridge between worlds. So would I, he said simply, so would I.